A Marine returned after 2 years and discovered his wife abandoned their child to marry a new man. If this kind of story touches your heart, like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The taxi pulled away from the curb with a diesel rumble that seemed to echo through James Keller's chest like a warning. 2 years, 730 days of counting down to this moment, of surviving sandstorms and sleepless nights, and the kind of heat that baked your thoughts until all that remained was the promise of home. Of Emily's laugh, of Liam's sticky fingers wrapped around his neck. James stood on the sidewalk, duffel bag heavy on his shoulder, staring at the house that should have been blazing with light and love. Instead, the windows stared back like dead eyes. No yellow ribbon tied around the oak tree. No "Welcome home" banner stretched across the porch where Emily used to sit with their morning coffee, planning their future in whispered dreams. The lawn was overgrown. Not Emily's pristine garden that she'd tended like a second child. Weeds choked the flower beds where she'd planted marigolds the day before he deployed. Bright orange blooms she'd promised would still be there when he returned. They weren't. His key turned in the lock with a click that sounded too loud in the evening quiet. The door swung open to reveal a living room that felt like stepping into someone else's life. The couch, their couch, where they'd made love the night before he left, where Liam had taken his first steps, was gone, replaced by a sleek black leather monstrosity that looked like it belonged in a magazine, not a home where a 3-year-old played with toy soldiers. James dropped his bag with a thud that seemed to shake the house. His hands trembled as he reached for the light switch, muscle memory guiding him to the exact spot where it had always been. The room flooded with harsh LED brightness that made his eyes water after so many months under desert sun. The family photos that had lined the mantelpiece, snapshots of lazy Sunday mornings, Liam's first birthday, their wedding day when Emily had looked at him like he was her entire universe. They were gone. Every single one. In their place, new pictures gleamed behind spotless glass. Emily, radiant in a sundress he'd never seen, her arms wrapped around a man with soft hands and a designer smile. And there, between them, was Liam. Liam. His little boy who should have been sleeping upstairs in the bedroom James had painted blue before deployment, dreaming of dinosaurs and superhero adventures. But in these photos, Liam wasn't looking at the camera with his father's mischievous grin. He looked different, quieter. His smile seemed forced, like someone had told him to be happy for the picture. The man's hand rested on Liam's shoulder with the casual possession of someone who believed he belonged there. James's legs gave out. He sank into the foreign couch, the leather cold against his combat fatigues, and pulled out the photograph he'd carried through 2 years of hell. Creased and faded, edges worn soft from his fingers tracing their faces during the longest nights. Emily, glowing with pregnancy, her hand on her belly. Him, young and certain that love could conquer anything, even war. And baby Liam, tiny fist curled around James's finger, eyes wide with the trust that only children possess. "Where are you, buddy?" he whispered to the empty room, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "Daddy's home." The sound of a key in the lock made him freeze. His heart hammered against his ribs as voices carried through the door. Emily's laugh, light and carefree, the way it used to sound when she saw him coming up the driveway. But she wasn't laughing for him now. "I can't believe you convinced me to try sushi," she was saying, her voice getting closer. "You know I'm impossible about new food." "That's what makes you perfect," a man's voice replied, smooth and confident. "Besides, you trusted me, didn't you?" The door opened. Emily stepped through first, her hair shorter now, styled in a way that made her look sophisticated, expensive. She wore a dress James had never seen, designer heels that clicked against the hardwood floor he'd installed with his own hands before deployment. Behind her, the man from the photographs, tall, clean-shaven, wearing the kind of watch that cost more than James made in 6 months. They were still laughing, still wrapped in the golden glow of whatever perfect evening they'd shared, when Emily looked up and saw him sitting on the couch. The laughter died in her throat. Her face went white, then red, then settled into something cold and hard that James had never seen before. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. James stood slowly, his body moving like he was underwater. "Emily, it's me. I know exactly who you are." She grabbed her phone from her purse with shaking hands. "And I'm calling the police." The man stepped forward, positioning himself between Emily and James like a shield. Is this him? The ex-husband. Ex-husband. The words hit James like shrapnel, tearing through his chest and lodging in his heart. Emily, what's going on? Where's Liam? Where's our son? She was already dialing, her fingers flying over the screen. Don't you dare. Don't you dare come into my home and start making demands. Our home, James said, desperation creeping into his voice. This is our home. I've been gone for 2 years serving our country, and I come back to what? To find that life moved on without you. Emily's eyes blazed with something that looked almost like hatred. That we didn't just sit here waiting like good little soldiers' wives while you played hero halfway around the world. The man put his hand on Emily's shoulder, a gesture so intimate and practiced that James felt bile rise in his throat. Baby, calm down. Let me handle this. Baby. The pet name James had whispered against Emily's neck on their wedding night. The word that had gotten him through firefights and sandstorms and the endless, crushing loneliness of deployment. Don't touch her, James said, his voice dropping to the tone that had made insurgents think twice about crossing him. And don't call her that. You need to leave, the man said, his voice steady but his eyes nervous. You're clearly disturbed. Emily, tell the operator this is a domestic situation. Yes, I need police at 1247 Maple Street. Emily was saying into the phone, her voice artificially calm. My ex-husband has broken into my home. He's been deployed overseas, and I think he might be having some kind of episode. He seems unstable. Aggressive. I'm afraid for my safety. Unstable. Aggressive. The words hit James harder than any IED blast. He'd spent 2 years fighting for freedom, for democracy, for the right of people like Emily to sleep safely in their beds. And now she was using his service, his sacrifice, as evidence that he was dangerous. Emily, please, he said, hating how his voice sounded, broken, begging. I just want to understand. I want to see my son. Something flickered across her face then, so fast he almost missed it. Guilt, maybe, or fear. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by that same cold mask. He doesn't live here anymore, she said, each word dropping like a stone into still water. The room tilted. James gripped the back of the couch, his knees threatening to buckle. What do you mean he doesn't live here? Where is he? But Emily had turned away, speaking in low, urgent tones to the 911 operator. The man was watching James with the careful attention of someone ready to run or fight, whichever seemed safer. Red and blue lights began to flash through the windows, painting the walls in colors that reminded James too much of emergency convoys and midnight raids. The sound of car doors slamming, heavy boots on the front steps. Here, Emily said as 3 officers filled the doorway. He's here. What followed was a blur of badge numbers and calm voices and James trying to explain that this was his house, his name on the deed, his mailbox out front. The officers were professional, almost gentle, but they listened to Emily's claims about PTSD and violent tendencies and the dangerous mindset of returning soldiers. Sir, we're going to need you to come with us, the lead officer said, his hand resting on his belt. Just to cool down, sort this out. But this is my house, James said again, showing them his military ID, his driver's license with this address, the key that had opened the front door. I've been deployed for 2 years. I just got home. We understand, sir. But right now, we need to de-escalate the situation. They didn't handcuff him. They didn't have to. James walked out between them with his chin up and his shoulders straight, the way his drill instructor had taught him to carry himself. But inside, he was collapsing, piece by piece, like a building coming down in slow motion. The neighbors had come out to watch. Mrs. Patterson from next door, the Johnsons from across the street, people who had known him since he and Emily first moved in as newlyweds. They stood in their doorways and on their porches, witnessing his humiliation with the hungry curiosity of people watching a car crash. As the patrol car pulled away from the curb, James caught a glimpse of Emily through the living room window. She was in the man's arms, her face buried against his chest, his hands stroking her hair, comforting her, protecting her from the monster who had invaded their perfect life. The monster who was her husband, the father of her child, the man who had carried her picture through hell and back, who had counted down the days until he could hold her again. James closed his eyes and tried to remember what hope felt like. The patrol car's engine ticked as it cooled in the parking lot of the police station. James sat in the back seat, his reflection ghost-like in the bulletproof glass, trying to make sense of a world that had shifted beneath his feet like desert sand. Through the window, he could see the officers talking to their supervisor, their voices too low to hear, but their gestures speaking volumes. Pointing back at him, shaking their heads, making the kind of faces that said this was more complicated than a simple domestic dispute. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the lead officer, Sergeant Martinez, according to his nameplate, slid into the front seat and turned to face him. "Mr. Keller," he said, his voice gentler now, tired. "We verified your identity. The house is legally yours, just like you said. Your wife, your ex-wife, she can't legally bar you from entering your own property." Ex-wife. There was that word again, cutting through him like broken glass. "We're not divorced," James said. "We're married. Have been for 5 years." Martinez glanced at his partner, who was still standing outside making phone calls. "Sir, according to our records, divorce papers were filed 18 months ago. The decree was finalized last spring." The words hit James like a punch to the solar plexus. He doubled over, gasping for air that suddenly felt too thin, too sharp in his lungs. "That's impossible. I never signed anything. I never even knew." "Sometimes spouses can file based on abandonment," Martinez said carefully, "especially with military deployments lasting longer than expected. But I wasn't absent. I was serving my country. My deployment was scheduled, approved. She knew where I was." James's voice cracked on the last word. "She knew I was coming home." Martinez looked uncomfortable, like a man who delivered too much bad news in his career. "Look, I can't speak to the legal details. But right now, the situation is volatile. Miss Foster, that's her name now. She's claiming you were threatening, that she fears for her safety." Foster. Emily had taken another man's name. The name James had given her, Keller, wasn't good enough anymore. Wasn't worthy of the new life she'd built while he was dodging bullets and carrying wounded soldiers to safety. "Where can I go?" James asked, hating how small his voice sounded. "If that's my house, but I can't stay there, where am I supposed to go?" "There's a veterans center downtown. Temporary housing, counseling services. Good people who understand what you're going through." What he was going through. Like this was some kind of normal adjustment period, a predictable phase that all returning soldiers experienced. Come home to find your family gone, your life erased, your wife in another man's arms. Just another box to check on the reintegration checklist. They drove him back to his house to collect his duffel bag. Emily's car was gone from the driveway, along with the man's silver BMW. The house sat dark and empty, keeping its secrets. James walked through rooms that should have felt like home, but instead felt like a museum of someone else's life. In the kitchen, the refrigerator was covered with photos held up by colorful magnets. Emily and the man at restaurants, at the beach, at what looked like a wedding reception. His wedding reception, apparently. But no pictures of Liam. Not a single one. James grabbed his duffel bag and was heading for the door when he heard a soft voice behind him. "Son." He turned to find an elderly woman standing in the kitchen doorway. Thin and frail, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that held too much kindness for a world this cruel. "Mrs. Chun," he said, recognizing his next-door neighbor. Emily had always been polite to the old woman, but had complained privately about her nosiness and the way she seemed to know everyone's business. "I saw the police cars," she said, stepping closer. Her voice shook slightly, whether from age or emotion, he couldn't tell. "I wanted to come over, but I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Of making things worse for you. That girl, Emily, she's been telling people such stories. About how you were violent before you left, how she was scared of you coming back." Mrs. Chin shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. "But I knew your daddy before he passed. Good man. And I watched you grow up in this neighborhood. You never raised a hand to anyone, not even when Tommy Martinez broke your bike on purpose in 7th grade. James felt tears burning behind his eyes. Someone remembered. Someone knew who he really was, before war and loss and betrayal had carved him into something unrecognizable. "Mrs. Chun," he said carefully, "do you know where my son is?" The old woman's face crumpled. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks like rain on weathered stone. "Oh, honey," she whispered. "You don't know, do you?" The floor seemed to drop away beneath James's feet. "Know what? Sit down, son. Please." James perched on the edge of the couch, the foreign leather couch that didn't belong in his home, and waited for Mrs. Chun to destroy what was left of his world. She gave him up, the old woman said, each word falling like a hammer blow. About a year ago, maybe 14 months, I heard her on the phone, arguing with someone about paperwork, about how she couldn't handle it anymore. The room spun around James like a carnival ride gone wrong. Gave him? What do you mean, gave him up? Foster care, honey. She surrendered him to the state. James shot to his feet, pacing to the window and back, his hands shaking with the need to hit something, to break something, to make the physical world match the destruction inside his chest. That's not possible. You don't just give up your child. Our child. She told people you weren't coming back, that you'd been killed in action, but the military couldn't confirm it yet. People felt sorry for her, a young widow struggling alone. Mrs. Chin's voice grew hard. But then that man started coming around. Rich man, fancy car. Suddenly, she didn't want to be a single mother anymore. Where is he? James asked, his voice barely human. Where's Liam? I don't know exactly, but there's a social worker. Mrs. Rodriguez. She came to the house a few times when they were making the arrangements. Works for the county. James grabbed a piece of paper from the kitchen counter and a pen from the junk drawer. Muscle memory guiding him to things that had been in the same place for years. What's her first name? Maria, I think. Maria Rodriguez. He wrote it down with hands that shook so badly the letters looked like a child's scrawl. Mrs. Chun, why didn't you call someone? Why didn't you report her? The old woman's shoulders sagged. Who was I going to call? A neighbor lady with suspicions? The police would have said it was none of my business. And Emily. She was so convincing. So sad and brave and overwhelmed. People wanted to help her, not question her. James understood. Emily had always been good at that, making people want to protect her, to solve her problems, to be her hero. It was one of the things that had drawn him to her in the first place, that fragile strength that made him feel needed. There's something else, Mrs. Chin said quietly. Something I probably shouldn't tell you, but you deserve to know. James looked up from the paper, bracing himself for another blow. The boy cried for you. Every night for months after she took him away. I could hear him through the walls, calling for his daddy. Broke my heart. She wiped her eyes with a tissue that had appeared from somewhere in her cardigan. She used to get so angry about it. I heard her yelling at him, telling him to stop, that you weren't coming back. The pen snapped in James's hand. Plastic and ink scattered across the counter, but he barely noticed. Somewhere in this city, his little boy, his son who had taken his first steps while James was learning to field strip weapons in the dark, was living with strangers, sleeping in a strange bed, wondering why Daddy had never come home like he promised. I have to find him, James said, more to himself than to Mrs. Chun. You will, the old woman said with fierce certainty. You're his father. You'll bring him home. As James walked out of the house for the second time that night, Mrs. Chun called after him. Son, that girl, Emily, she never deserved you. And she sure as hell never deserved that precious boy. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and James stood on the porch where he used to kiss Emily goodbye before work, where he'd taught Liam to high-five, where he'd promised his son that Daddy would always come home. He pulled out his phone and started searching for the county social services department. Maria Rodriguez was about to get a very early morning phone call. The county social services building squatted on the corner of 5th and Main like a concrete monument to broken dreams. James had been standing across the street for 20 minutes, watching people flow in and out of the glass doors, social workers with tired eyes and coffee-stained blazers, families clutching manila folders like lifelines, children who looked too old for their ages trailing behind adults who might or might not be their parents. He'd called Maria Rodriguez at 7 that morning, his voice still rough with sleepless exhaustion, and learned what bureaucracy sounded like when it tried to be kind. Yes, she was familiar with his case. No, she couldn't discuss details over the phone. Yes, he could come in, but he'd need to bring documentation. Lots of documentation. James touched the folder tucked under his arm. Birth certificate, marriage license, military ID, deployment orders, every piece of paper that proved he existed, that proved he was Liam's father, that proved he hadn't simply vanished into thin air the way Emily had apparently told everyone. The Veterans Center had let him use their computer and printer all night, helping him compile evidence of a life that someone had tried very hard to erase. The automatic doors whispered open as he approached, releasing a wave of fluorescent light and industrial disinfectant. Inside, the waiting room looked like every government building he'd ever seen. Beige walls, mismatched chairs, posters about services and rights and responsibilities that somehow managed to be both overwhelming and completely unhelpful. "I'm here to see Maria Rodriguez," he told the receptionist, a middle-aged woman whose nameplate read Dolores, and whose expression suggested she'd heard every sob story in the book. "I called this morning about my son." Dolores looked him up and down, taking in his pressed button-down shirt and khakis, the closest thing to civilian professional where he owned, and the military posture he couldn't shake even when he tried. "Name: James Keller. My son is Liam Keller." She typed something into her computer, frowned, typed some more. "Have a seat. She'll be with you shortly." Shortly turned out to be an hour and 43 minutes. James spent the time watching other people's dramas unfold in whispered conversations with caseworkers, studying the faces of children who clutched stuffed animals and looked at adults with the wariness of prey animals. He wondered if Liam looked like that now, if the trust and joy that had lit up his son's face had been replaced by the careful blankness he saw in these waiting room children. "Mr. Keller?" James looked up to see a woman in her 40s, Hispanic, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and the kind of face that had seen too much but somehow managed to hold on to compassion anyway. She wore a burgundy cardigan that had seen better days and carried a stack of files that looked heavy enough to require their own forklift. "Ms. Rodriguez? Maria, please. Come on back." Her office was a study in organized chaos, filing cabinets that looked ready to burst, a desk covered in case files and coffee cups and family photos, motivational posters that had probably been inspirational once upon a time. She gestured to a chair across from her desk and settled into her own with the careful movements of someone whose back had given up on proper posture years ago. "So," she said, opening one of the files, "you're Liam's father." "I am. And you've been deployed overseas." "2 years. Afghanistan. I got back yesterday." He paused, the words still feeling surreal. "I came home to find my wife had divorced me and given up our son for adoption." Maria's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes softened. "Mr. Keller, I have to ask, and please don't take this the wrong way, but did you have any contact with your family during your deployment?" "Of course I did. I called when I could, sent emails, letters. Not as often as I wanted to, but—" James stopped, remembering the last few months of deployment when his calls had gone straight to voicemail, when his emails had bounced back undelivered. "Actually, toward the end, communication got difficult. I thought it was just technical problems, satellite issues." Maria made a note in the file. "When was the last time you spoke directly to your wife?" James had to think about it. The dates blurred together in his memory, a fog of desert heat and adrenaline and counting days. "Maybe 8 months ago. 9. I kept trying to call, but she wasn't answering. I thought she was busy. With Liam, with work. I thought." He trailed off, the pieces clicking together in his mind like a puzzle he should have solved months ago. "She blocked me, didn't she?" "Mr. Keller, your wife filed for divorce, citing abandonment and failure to provide support. She claimed you had cut off all contact with your family and that she had no way to reach you." The words hit James like physical blows. "That's not true. I never stopped trying to contact them. My pay was automatically deposited into our joint account. I never abandoned anyone." "I believe you," Maria said quietly. "But the court had to make decisions based on the information available at the time." "What about Liam? What did she tell you about him?" Maria's face grew carefully neutral, the expression of someone who'd learned to deliver devastating news without destroying herself in the process. She said she couldn't handle being a single mother, that she was having financial difficulties, emotional problems. She said the boy was acting out, having behavioral issues related to his father's absence. Behavioral issues? James felt his heart rate spike. What kind of behavioral issues? According to the file, he was having nightmares, refusing to eat, crying constantly. The school reported that he was withdrawn, wouldn't participate in activities. Maria looked up from the file, her expression gentle but serious. "Mr. Keller, children of deployed military parents often struggle with anxiety and abandonment issues. It's not uncommon." "But he wasn't abandoned," James said, his voice rising despite his efforts to stay calm. "I was serving my country. I was always planning to come home." "I know. But to a 3-year-old child, absence is absence, regardless of the reason. The rational part of James's mind understood what she was saying. The father part of him wanted to put his fist through the wall. His son had been suffering, crying himself to sleep, and James had been half a world away, completely unaware that his family was falling apart. "Where is he now?" James asked. "He's in foster care. A very good family, actually. The Hendersons. They specialize in caring for children from military families, so they understand the unique challenges." "I want to see him." "Of course you do. But Mr. Keller, we have to follow proper procedures. There will be paperwork, background checks, supervised visits at first." "Background checks?" James interrupted. "I'm his father. I understand your frustration. But from the system's perspective, you've been absent from his life for over a year. We have to ensure that any reunification is in the child's best interest." James gripped the arms of his chair so hard his knuckles went white. "Ms. Rodriguez. Maria, I've spent 2 years fighting terrorists so that children like my son can sleep safely in their beds. I've carried wounded soldiers through gunfire. I've done things I can't talk about and seen things I can't forget, all in service to this country. And now you're telling me I have to prove I'm not a danger to my own child." Maria leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm telling you that we have a legal process designed to protect children, even from well-meaning parents who might not be ready for the challenges of reintegration." "Reintegration?" James laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Everyone keeps using that word like this is normal. Like coming home to find your family gone is just part of the military experience. Isn't it?" Maria asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them like smoke from a cigarette, acrid and impossible to ignore. James thought about the other soldiers he'd served with. How many of them had gotten Dear John letters, divorce papers, custody battles? How many had come home to find their civilian lives in ruins while they were overseas building democracy? "Maybe," he admitted, "but that doesn't make it right." Maria pulled out a stack of forms and set them on the desk. "These are the documents you'll need to fill out to begin the reunification process. I can't promise it will be fast, and I can't promise it will be easy. But Mr. Keller, I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I've seen a lot of fathers walk away when things got complicated. The fact that you're here, fighting for your son, that tells me something about who you are." James picked up the forms, his hands steadier now. "When can I see him?" "If you get these back to me by tomorrow, I can arrange a supervised visit for this weekend. 1 hour, here at the office." 1 hour. After 2 years of separation, after months of not knowing if his son was alive or dead, he would get 1 hour. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was a start. "There's one more thing," Maria said as James stood to leave. "The foster family, they've grown very attached to Liam. And he to them. This transition is going to be difficult for everyone involved." "Are you saying they want to adopt him?" "I'm saying they care about him very much. And they've been talking to a lawyer." James felt the world tilt sideways again. Not only had Emily given away their son, but now strangers were trying to keep him. The bureaucracy that was supposed to protect families was threatening to tear his apart permanently. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said, his voice deadly quiet, "I need you to understand something. I didn't survive 2 years of war to come home and lose my son to paperwork. I'll play by your rules, fill out your forms, jump through your hoops. But at the end of the day, Liam is my son, and I'm taking him home." Maria nodded slowly. "I hope you do, Mr. Keller. I really do. But first, we have to make sure home is a place where a little boy can heal." As James walked out of the building, forms clutched in his hand like a battle plan, he wondered if he even remembered how to be a father. If the man who had learned to kill efficiently and sleep through artillery fire could somehow become the daddy his son needed. He had 3 days to figure it out. The family visitation room at the County Social Services building was designed to look cheerful and non-threatening. Bright yellow walls covered with children's artwork, a play area filled with donated toys that had seen better days, chairs that were supposed to encourage conversation, but mostly just highlighted how awkward these meetings really were. James had been sitting in one of those chairs for 10 minutes, his palms sweating despite the air conditioning, when the door opened. Maria Rodriguez came in first, followed by a middle-aged couple who looked like they'd stepped out of a suburban lifestyle magazine. The woman was petite and blonde, wearing a sundress that probably cost more than James's monthly rent. The man was tall and soft-looking, with the kind of tan that came from golf courses rather than desert deployments. They looked kind, caring, successful, everything James suddenly felt he wasn't. "Mr. Keller," Maria said, "I'd like you to meet David and Susan Henderson, Liam's foster parents." James stood, extending his hand with the automatic courtesy that had been drilled into him since boot camp. David Henderson's handshake was firm but brief, like a man who wasn't entirely comfortable with the situation. Susan's smile was warm but cautious, the expression of someone walking on eggshells. "We've heard so much about you," Susan said, her voice carrying the slight drawl of someone who'd grown up in the South. "Liam talks about his daddy all the time." The words hit James square in the chest. "He does." "Oh yes," David added, settling into one of the uncomfortable chairs. "It's actually been one of our biggest challenges, helping him understand why you haven't been able to visit before now." James felt his jaw clench. The implication was clear. "Where have you been?" But before he could respond, Maria cleared her throat. "Why don't we wait for Liam before we discuss anything further? He should be here any minute." As if summoned by her words, the door opened again. A woman James didn't recognize, another social worker, probably, stepped into the room, and behind her, James forgot how to breathe. Liam stood in the doorway, one small hand clutching a battered stuffed dinosaur, the other holding tight to the social worker's finger. He was taller than James remembered, his face thinner, his dark hair longer and badly in need of a cut. But his eyes, those were still the same eyes that had looked up at James from a hospital bassinet 4 years ago, wide and dark and full of questions. "Daddy." The word came out as barely a whisper, but it might as well have been a shout for the way it echoed through James's heart. "Hey there, buddy," James said, his voice thick with emotions he couldn't name. He started to stand, then stopped, unsure of the protocol. Was he allowed to hug his son? Pick him up? Or would that be seen as too aggressive, too overwhelming for a child who'd been taught to fear his father's return? Liam took a tentative step forward, then another. His grip on the dinosaur tightened. "Are you really my daddy?" he asked, his voice small and uncertain. "Mommy said you went away and weren't coming back." James felt something break inside his chest. He knelt down, bringing himself to Liam's eye level, and pulled out the photograph he'd carried through 2 years of hell. The one of him and Emily and baby Liam, back when they were a family. "See this picture, buddy? That's you when you were just a little baby. And that's me, your daddy. I had to go far away for work, but I always planned to come back to you." Liam studied the photograph with the intense concentration that only children possessed. He looked up at James's face, comparing features, searching for proof that this stranger claiming to be his father was telling the truth. "You look different," he said finally. James touched his own face, feeling the scars that hadn't been there when the picture was taken, the lines that had appeared around his eyes, the way his jaw had hardened from too many months of constant vigilance. "Yeah, I do. Being away changed me a little bit. But inside, where it counts, I'm still the same daddy who loves you more than anything in the whole world." Liam took another step closer. "Do you still like dinosaurs?" James felt a smile tug at the corners of his mouth, the first real smile he'd managed since coming home. "I love dinosaurs. Is that your favorite one?" He nodded toward the stuffed animal. "His name is Rex. I got him when—" Liam glanced back at the Hendersons, suddenly uncertain. "When I came to live with Mama Susan and Papa David." Mama Susan and Papa David. James felt the smile die on his face. His son was calling strangers by parental names while James sat across the room like a visitor. "That's a good name for a dinosaur," James managed to say. "Can I meet Rex?" Liam looked back at Susan Henderson, seeking permission. She nodded encouragingly, and the little boy walked slowly across the room, stopping just within arm's reach of James. "Rex, this is my daddy," he said solemnly, holding up the dinosaur. "Daddy, this is Rex. He keeps the bad dreams away." James carefully took the worn stuffed animal, examining it with the same seriousness Liam had shown. The dinosaur was clearly well-loved. One eye was missing, the green fabric was faded from countless washings, and the stuffing was compressed from being hugged too tightly too many times. "He's very brave," James said, handing Rex back. "I can tell he's been taking good care of you." "I have bad dreams sometimes," Liam said, sitting down in the chair next to James. "About monsters and loud noises and people going away forever. Rex fights the monsters." James felt his throat tighten. His son was having nightmares, probably about abandonment, about loss, about all the ways adults had failed him. And James hadn't been there to chase away the monsters or hold him when he woke up crying. I used to have bad dreams too, when I was far away, James said carefully. Do you know what helped me? Liam shook his head, eyes wide with interest. I would think about you, about your smile and your laugh, and how you used to help me make pancakes on Saturday mornings. Thinking about you made me feel brave enough to go back to sleep. You thought about me? Liam's voice was barely audible. Every single day, every single night. I missed you so much, buddy. Something shifted in Liam's expression, a crack in the careful wall he'd built around his heart. He scooted his chair closer to James. Mama Susan said maybe you forgot about me, because I wasn't good enough. James felt white-hot rage surge through his veins, but he kept his voice gentle. Liam, look at me. I need you to listen very carefully, okay? I never, ever forgot about you. Not for 1 second. And you are good enough. You're perfect. You're my son, and I love you exactly the way you are. Tears began to slide down Liam's cheeks. Then why didn't you come home? Why didn't you call me? The question that had no good answer. How do you explain to a 4-year-old that his mother had lied, that she'd blocked communication and filed for divorce and given him away like an unwanted pet? How do you destroy a child's image of his mother, even when that mother had already destroyed everything else? Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, James said finally. And sometimes bad things happen that nobody can control. But I'm here now, and I'm never going to leave you again if I can help it. Promise. The word hung in the air like a challenge. James was acutely aware of Maria watching him, of the Hendersons listening to every word, of the legal and bureaucratic obstacles that still stood between him and his son. He had no right to make promises he might not be able to keep. But looking into Liam's eyes, those eyes that held too much pain for someone so young, James found he couldn't do anything else. I promise, buddy. Daddy's going to fight to bring you home. Liam launched himself out of his chair and into James's arms with the sudden unpredictability of a child who'd made a decision. James caught him instinctively, pulling him close, breathing in the scent of his son's hair and feeling the solid weight of him that proved this wasn't a dream. I missed you, Daddy, Liam whispered against James's neck. I missed you so much. I missed you too, son. More than you'll ever know. Over Liam's head, James caught Susan Henderson's expression. She was crying, but they weren't tears of joy. They were the tears of a woman watching her heart break in real time. She and her husband had been caring for Liam for over a year. They'd been the ones to comfort him through nightmares, to take him to the doctor when he was sick, to help him learn to ride a bike and tie his shoes. They'd been his parents in every way that mattered. And now James was back, threatening to take away the child they'd grown to love as their own. He's been through so much, Susan said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. The first few months, he barely spoke. He would just sit in the corner and cry for his daddy. We didn't know if you were alive or dead, what to tell him. We've been working with a child psychologist, David added. Dr. Martinez. She's helped him process the abandonment trauma. But it's been a long road. Abandonment trauma. Another clinical term for the damage that had been done to his son while James was serving his country. Another way of saying that Liam's childhood had been stolen by adults who were supposed to protect him. I'd like to meet with this Dr. Martinez, James said, still holding Liam close. I want to understand what he's been through, how I can help him heal. Maria made a note in her file. I can arrange that. Dr. Martinez has been hoping to speak with you, actually. She has some concerns about the transition process. What kind of concerns? Well, Maria glanced at the Hendersons before continuing. Liam has formed very strong attachment bonds with his foster family. Disrupting those bonds suddenly could cause significant psychological damage. James felt his arms tighten around his son. Are you saying I can't have him back? I'm saying we need to proceed carefully. Maybe start with extended visits, overnight stays, a gradual transition. No. The word came out harder than James intended. Liam looked up at him with startled eyes, and James forced his voice to soften. I understand the need to be careful, but he's my son. He belongs with me. Mr. Keller, David Henderson said, his voice carefully controlled. We understand that you're his biological father, but you've been absent from his life for over a year. Susan and I have been his constant caregivers, his source of stability. We love him as if he were our own. But he's not your own, James replied, the words sharper than he'd intended. He's mine. The room fell silent except for the sound of Liam's breathing against James's shoulder. The little boy had gone very still, sensing the tension between the adults even if he didn't understand its source. Maybe we should take a break, Maria suggested. This is a lot of information to process, and Liam's getting overwhelmed. As if on cue, Liam pulled back from James's embrace and looked around the room with the confused expression of a child caught between competing loyalties. Am I in trouble? He asked in a small voice. Did I do something wrong? No, sweetheart, Susan Henderson said quickly, reaching toward him. You didn't do anything wrong. But Liam pulled away from her outstretched hand and stayed close to James. The gesture was small, almost unconscious, but it spoke volumes. Despite over a year of separation, despite the careful work of therapists and foster parents, something primal in Liam still recognized his father. Daddy, Liam said, looking up at James with eyes that held too much hope and too much fear. Are you going to take me home now? James felt the weight of every adult's expectation pressing down on him. Maria wanted him to follow proper procedures. The Hendersons wanted him to respect their emotional investment. His son wanted him to be the hero who made everything right. But James had learned something in 2 years of war. Sometimes you had to choose between what was safe and what was right. Sometimes you had to risk everything for the people you loved. Not today, buddy, he said gently. But soon. Very soon. I just need to take care of some grown-up things first, okay? Liam nodded solemnly, accepting this answer with the patience of a child who'd learned not to expect too much from adults. As the visit wound down and the Hendersons prepared to take Liam back to their house, where he slept in their guest room and called them by parental names, James felt something crystallize inside him. A decision that had been building since the moment he'd walked into his empty house and seen the photos of his replaced family. He was done playing by other people's rules, done accepting that bureaucracy and good intentions trumped the basic right of a father to raise his son, done pretending that Liam would be better off with well-meaning strangers than with the man who'd given him life. Mr. Keller, Maria said as they prepared to leave, I'll call you this week about setting up another visit, and we'll get you that appointment with Dr. Martinez. Actually, James said, standing up and straightening his shoulders in a gesture that would have been familiar to anyone who'd ever served under him. I think it's time I consulted with my own expert. What kind of expert? James smiled, but there was nothing friendly in it. A lawyer. The law office of Patricia Hawkins, attorney at law, occupied the second floor of a converted Victorian house on the edge of downtown, the kind of place that managed to feel both professional and welcoming at the same time. James had found her through the Veterans Center, a former military lawyer who specialized in family law and had a reputation for taking on cases that other attorneys wouldn't touch. Patricia Hawkins turned out to be a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the bearing of someone who'd learned to command respect in rooms full of men. She listened to James's story without interruption, taking notes in a leather-bound pad and occasionally asking for clarification on dates or details. So let me make sure I understand, she said when he'd finished. You were deployed for 2 years, during which time your wife blocked all communication from you, filed for divorce citing abandonment, and surrendered your son to foster care, all without your knowledge or consent. That's right. And now the county is treating you like a stranger who has to prove his fitness to parent his own child. While the foster parents are talking about adoption, James added grimly. Patricia leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. Mr. Keller, I have to ask, and please don't take offense, but is there any truth to your wife's claims? Any history of domestic violence, substance abuse, mental health issues? None, James said firmly. I've never raised a hand to Emily or Liam. I don't drink beyond an occasional beer. My military psychological evaluations are clean. What about PTSD? Combat stress? James hesitated. This was the question he'd been dreading, the one that could derail everything. I've seen things overseas that no one should have to see, done things that haunt me, but I've never been diagnosed with PTSD, and I've never been a danger to my family. Patricia made another note. We'll need to get you evaluated by an independent psychologist, someone who specializes in military trauma. Not because I doubt your word, but because we need to be proactive about addressing any concerns the court might raise. Fine. What else? We need to establish a timeline of communication attempts. Phone records, email logs, anything that proves you were trying to maintain contact with your family. We also need to examine the divorce proceedings. If you never receive proper notice, if your wife committed fraud in obtaining the decree, we might be able to have it overturned. James felt a flicker of hope. Is that possible? It's complicated, but yes. Military members are protected by the Service Members Civil Relief Act, which requires courts to delay proceedings if a service member can't participate due to deployment. If your wife told the court you'd abandon the family when she knew you were deployed, that's fraud. Exactly. And if she intercepted or blocked legal notices, that's another violation. Patricia looked up from her notes. Mr. Keller, I'm going to be blunt with you. This case is going to be expensive, time-consuming, and emotionally brutal. Your ex-wife and her new husband have resources, and they've had over a year to build their narrative. Are you prepared for that fight? James thought about Liam's small hand in his, about the way his son had whispered, "I missed you, Daddy," like a prayer. I'd fight the devil himself to get my son back. Good, because we might have to. Patricia closed her notebook and leaned forward. I'm going to put an investigator on this case. Someone who can dig into your ex-wife's finances, her timeline of actions, her communications with various agencies. If she's been lying about your abandonment, there will be evidence. What about the foster parents? Can they really adopt Liam? Not without terminating your parental rights first, which is a very high legal bar to clear. But they can petition for custody, especially if they can convince a judge that you're an unfit parent or that removing Liam from their care would cause him psychological harm. The words hit James like a physical blow. So I could lose him anyway. Not if I have anything to say about it. Patricia's voice carried the steel of someone who'd won harder battles than this. Mr. Keller, I've represented dozens of military parents in situations like yours. The system often fails our service members, treating deployment as abandonment and treating combat experience as a liability. But you have rights, and we're going to fight for them. 3 days later, Patricia called with news that changed everything. We found her, she said without preamble when James answered the phone. The investigator tracked down your ex-wife's digital footprint, and Mr. Keller, what we discovered is going to blow this case wide open. James was at the Veterans Center, helping other returned soldiers navigate the bureaucracy of civilian life. He stepped outside for privacy, his heart hammering. What did you find? Email records showing that Emily was receiving and deleting your messages without reading them. Bank records proving she was accessing your military pay while telling everyone you'd cut off financial support. And here's the big one. She was in communication with a family lawyer about divorce proceedings 6 months before she actually filed, while you were still deployed and still trying to contact her. Jesus. It gets better. The investigator also found social media posts, deleted now, but cached by search engines, where Emily was complaining to friends about being tied down by a military husband and a young child. Posts about wanting to start fresh, about meeting someone new. This wasn't a desperate single mother overwhelmed by circumstances, Mr. Keller. This was a woman who wanted a different life and was willing to destroy yours to get it. James felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. What about Liam? What did she say about him? Patricia's voice grew gentle. She referred to him as a burden and a reminder of past mistakes. In one post, she actually wrote, and I'm quoting here, "I love him, but I never wanted to be a mother this young." Maybe it's time to admit that some people aren't meant for this. The phone creaked in James's grip. His wife, his ex-wife, had given away their son not because she couldn't handle being a single parent, but because she'd never wanted to be a parent at all. Liam wasn't a casualty of war or deployment stress. He was simply unwanted baggage that Emily had discarded when a better offer came along. There's more, Patricia continued. The investigator spoke to some of your former neighbors. Several of them remember Emily talking about her new boyfriend, Robert Foster, months before you returned. Apparently, he was pressuring her to clean up her situation before they got married. He didn't want to be a stepfather. So she threw away our son to please her new husband. That's exactly what she did. And Mr. Keller? We have documentation of all of it. Email chains, financial records, witness statements. When we walk into court, we're going to have enough evidence to prove that Emily committed fraud, perjury, and willful abandonment of her child while falsely claiming you were the one who'd abandoned your family. James closed his eyes, feeling something that might have been relief or might have been rage. He couldn't tell the difference anymore. What happens now? Now we go on the offensive. I'm filing motions to have the divorce decree overturned, to have Emily's custody surrendered declared invalid, and to establish your immediate parental rights. We're also going to demand a full investigation into how the County Social Services Department allowed this to happen without proper verification of Emily's claims. And Liam, we're going to bring him home, Mr. Keller. I can't promise it will be quick or easy, but we're going to bring him home. That evening, James sat in his temporary room at the Veterans Center, staring at the evidence Patricia's investigator had compiled. Screenshots of Emily's social media posts, bank records showing her systematic theft of his military pay, email logs proving she'd been lying about his absence. It was all there in black and white. The deliberate destruction of his family by the woman he'd loved enough to marry, to trust with his heart and his future. But what hurt most wasn't the betrayal. It was the realization that while he'd been fighting for freedom and democracy in a foreign country, his son had been living with the knowledge that his own mother saw him as a burden, that the woman who should have protected him had instead given him away like an unwanted piece of furniture. James picked up his phone and dialed the number Maria Rodriguez had given him. Ms. Rodriguez? This is James Keller. I need to schedule another visit with my son. There are some things I need to tell him. Mr. Keller, I'm not sure that's wise. Children shouldn't be involved in adult conflicts. He's not going to be involved in anything, James interrupted. But he deserves to know that his father never stopped fighting for him. And he deserves to know that he's wanted, that he's loved, that he was never, ever a mistake. There was silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Maria spoke, her voice soft with understanding. I'll set something up for tomorrow afternoon. But Mr. Keller, whatever you're planning, please be careful. That little boy has been through enough. Ms. Rodriguez, James said, looking out the window at the city where his son was sleeping in someone else's house. What I'm planning is to be his father. Finally, the courthouse steps were slick with morning rain, and James could feel the November chill seeping through his dress blue uniform as he climbed toward the entrance. He'd chosen to wear his military dress uniform deliberately, not as a prop or a bid for sympathy, but as a reminder of who he was and what he'd sacrificed. The ribbons on his chest told the story of his service. Combat Action Ribbon, Afghanistan Campaign Medal, Army Commendation Medal with V device for valor. They were proof that he wasn't the unstable, dangerous man Emily had painted him to be. Patricia Hawkins met him at the courthouse entrance, her briefcase in one hand and an expression of grim satisfaction on her face. Behind her walked the investigator who'd uncovered Emily's web of lies, a former police detective named Marcus Chun who specialized in digital forensics and financial fraud. Ready for this? Patricia asked, adjusting her own professional armor, a sharp navy suit that made her look like someone you wouldn't want to face in court. I've been ready for 3 months, James replied, thinking of all the supervised visits, the psychological evaluations, the endless paperwork and legal maneuvering that had brought them to this moment. Inside the courthouse, the family court waiting area buzzed with the usual chaos of broken families and custody disputes. James saw Emily immediately. She sat in the back row with her new husband, Robert Foster, both of them dressed like they were attending a country club board meeting rather than a hearing that would determine the fate of a child. Emily looked older, James thought, harder around the edges. Success and guilt were differently on different people. Across the aisle, David and Susan Henderson sat with their own attorney, a sharp-eyed woman who'd built her career representing adoptive families. Susan was crying quietly, her hands twisted in her lap. David sat rigid beside her, his jaw clenched with the kind of tension that came from knowing you were about to lose something precious. At the front of the courtroom, Judge Sarah Martinez, no relation to the social worker, reviewed the case files with the methodical attention of someone who'd seen too many families destroyed by adult selfishness. She was known for being tough but fair, for caring more about children's welfare than legal technicalities. All rise, the bailiff called, and the courtroom full of broken families and shattered dreams got to its feet. Be seated, Judge Martinez said after taking the bench. We're here today for the matter of Keller versus Foster regarding custody of the minor child Liam Keller. I've reviewed all the filings, and I have to say, this is one of the most troubling cases I've encountered in 15 years on this bench. James felt his heart rate spike. Troubling could mean anything. Troubling that a father had been denied his rights, or troubling that he was trying to reclaim them now. Patricia stood first. Your Honor, We're here to right a grave injustice committed against my client, Corporal James Keller, and his son. While Mr. Keller was deployed overseas serving his country, his wife systematically destroyed his relationship with his family through fraud, deception, and willful interference with his parental rights. That's a serious accusation, Counselor, Judge Martinez replied. I trust you have evidence to support it. We do, Your Honor. Extensive evidence. What followed was 3 hours of methodical destruction of Emily's carefully constructed lies. Patricia presented email logs showing Emily deleting James's messages without reading them. Bank records proving she'd stolen over $30,000 in military benefits while claiming he'd cut off financial support. Social media posts where she'd called Liam a burden and complained about being trapped by motherhood. The most damning evidence came from Marcus Chin's digital forensics work. He'd recovered deleted text messages between Emily and Robert Foster from before she'd filed for divorce. Messages where Foster had made it clear that he didn't want to be a stepfather, where Emily had promised to take care of her situation with Liam before their wedding. She didn't surrender Liam because she couldn't handle being a single mother, Patricia argued. She gave him up to please her new husband, while simultaneously destroying his relationship with his biological father. This wasn't desperation, Your Honor. It was calculated cruelty. Emily's attorney did her best to spin the evidence, talking about the stress of military life, the challenges of single parenthood, the need to move forward with her life. But the documented lies were too extensive, too deliberate to explain away. Then it was the Hendersons' turn. Their attorney painted a picture of a stable, loving home where Liam had found security after trauma. She presented testimony from Liam's therapist about the potential psychological damage of removing him from his foster family. She showed photos of birthday parties and school events, Christmas mornings, and bedtime stories. All the moments James had missed while serving overseas. The Hendersons have been this child's psychological parents for over 18 months, their attorney argued. They've helped him heal from abandonment trauma. They've given him stability and love. To tear him away from them now would be devastating. It was David Henderson's testimony that nearly broke James's resolve. We never meant for this to happen, the older man said, his voice thick with emotion. We became foster parents to help children in crisis, not to steal them from their families. But when Liam came to us, he was so broken, so afraid. He used to wake up screaming every night, crying for his daddy. We didn't know if you were alive or dead, Mr. Keller. We thought we were all he had. Susan Henderson was sobbing openly now. We love him like our own, she whispered. We've loved him from the first night he slept in our house. But if his father is alive, if his father wants him, we understand. We've always known this day might come. Judge Martinez called a recess, and James found himself in the courthouse bathroom, splashing cold water on his face and trying to steady his breathing. Patricia found him there, her expression unreadable. How bad is it? He asked. It's not bad at all, she replied. Judge Martinez has already made up her mind. I can see it in her eyes. She's going to grant you custody. The question is whether it's immediate or gradual. What do you think she'll decide? Patricia studied his face. I think she's going to ask you a very important question. And your answer is going to determine whether you walk out of here with your son today or whether you spend the next 6 months in supervised transition. When court reconvened, Judge Martinez looked directly at James. Corporal Keller, would you please stand? James rose, his back straight, his hands steady. I've reviewed all the evidence in this case, and I'm prepared to rule. But first, I have a question for you. You've been fighting for 18 months to reclaim your son. You've uncovered extensive evidence of fraud and deception. You have every legal and moral right to walk out of this courtroom with Liam today. But that little boy has been through more trauma than any child should endure. He's formed strong attachment bonds with his foster family. Taking him immediately might be your right, but it might not be what's best for him. So I'm asking you, as his father, what do you want me to order? The courtroom fell silent. James could feel everyone's eyes on him. Emily's guilty stare, the Hendersons' desperate hopefulness, Patricia's professional concern. But most importantly, he could feel the weight of Liam's future in his hands. James thought about all the nights he'd dreamed of this moment, all the rage and hurt and desperate need that had driven him to fight for custody, all the plans he'd made for their life together, just him and his son against the world. Then he thought about Liam's face during their visits, the gradual warming, the the slow rebuilding of trust, but also the confusion and conflict in his eyes. The way he still called the Hendersons Mama Susan and Papa David, even though he was beginning to remember what Daddy meant. "Your Honor," James said, his voice steady. "What I want is what's best for my son. If that means a gradual transition, if that means shared custody with the Hendersons until he's more comfortable, if that means putting his needs ahead of my wants, then that's what I'm asking for." Judge Martinez nodded slowly. "And Mrs. Foster? Do you have anything to say before I rule?" Emily stood, her face pale but defiant. "I did what I thought was best at the time. I was alone. I was overwhelmed. I thought he wasn't coming back." "Stop," Judge Martinez said sharply. "Mrs. Foster, the evidence shows that you committed fraud, perjury, and child abandonment while stealing your husband's military benefits. The only reason you're not facing criminal charges is because Mr. Keller has chosen not to press them. I suggest you remain silent before you say something that changes his mind." Emily sank back into her seat, finally understanding that her lies had been exposed, her careful narrative destroyed. "Here's my ruling," Judge Martinez continued. "The divorce decree obtained by Mrs. Foster is hereby declared invalid due to fraudulent misrepresentation. The custody surrender is overturned due to the mother's lack of legal standing. She had no right to terminate Mr. Keller's parental rights without his knowledge or consent." James felt his knees go weak with relief. "However," the judge continued, "the child's best interests require a gradual transition. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson will retain physical custody for the next 60 days, during which time Mr. Keller will have escalating visitation, weekends, then week-long stays, then 2-week periods. At the end of 60 days, assuming all goes well, full custody will transfer to Mr. Keller." She looked directly at the Hendersons. "Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, your care of this child has been exemplary. You gave him love and stability when he needed it most. I'm ordering that you maintain a relationship with Liam after the custody transfer. He's going to need all the adults who love him to help him through this transition." Susan Henderson was crying again, but they were tears of relief now. She would lose daily custody of the boy she'd come to love as a son, but she wouldn't lose him completely. "One final matter," Judge Martinez said, her voice taking on a hard edge. "Mrs. Foster, you owe Mr. Keller restitution for the military benefits you stole, $31, $247 plus interest. You have 90 days to make payment, or I'll be happy to refer this matter to the district attorney for criminal prosecution." Emily's face went white, but she nodded. "Court is adjourned." As the gavel fell, James felt hands clapping him on the back. Patricia, Marcus Chun, even some of the other veterans who'd come to support him. But his eyes were on the Hendersons, who were walking slowly toward him with expressions of graceful defeat. "Mr. Keller," David Henderson said, extending his hand. "Congratulations. You fought for your son, and you won." "We both won," James replied, shaking the older man's hand. "Liam is going to need all of us to help him heal from what he's been through." Susan Henderson stepped forward, tears still streaming down her face. Would you consider letting us say goodbye properly? Maybe have dinner with him tonight. Help him understand what's happening." James felt his throat tighten. "Mrs. Henderson, you saved my son when I couldn't. You kept him safe and loved when the system failed him. You're not saying goodbye. You're family now, if you want to be." And for the first time since he'd walked into his empty house 3 months ago, James felt something like peace settle over him. 2 months later, on a Saturday morning bright with the promise of spring, James stood in the driveway of 1247 Maple Street, his house, his home, where he belonged, and watched his son attempt to ride a bicycle without training wheels. Liam wobbled and weaved, his small face set in concentration, his tongue poking out the corner of his mouth the way it had when he was a toddler trying to stack blocks. "I can do it, Daddy," Liam called out as he managed to pedal 10 feet without falling. "Look at me. I'm looking, buddy," James called back, his heart so full it felt like it might burst. "You're doing great." The house looked different now. James had repainted the walls, hung new photos, pictures of him and Liam at the zoo, at the park, at the Hendersons' house for Sunday dinner. The foreign black leather couch was gone, replaced by a comfortable sectional where he and Liam could watch movies and read books together. Liam's bedroom had been restored to its former glory, blue walls covered with dinosaur posters, a toy box overflowing with action figures, and building blocks. It wasn't perfect. Liam still had nightmares sometimes, still asked difficult questions about why mommy had given him away, still needed therapy to work through the trauma of abandonment and displacement. But he was healing. They both were. The front door opened, and Susan Henderson emerged carrying a plate of fresh cookies and a cup of coffee for James. She'd taken to stopping by on weekends, ostensibly to check on Liam, but really because she couldn't quite let go of the boy she'd loved as a son. James didn't mind. Liam needed all the love he could get, and the Hendersons had earned their place in his life. "He's getting better," Susan observed, watching Liam navigate a wobbly turn around the mailbox. "Yeah, he is," James agreed. "We both are." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the miracle of a little boy learning to trust again. Trust his balance, trust his abilities, trust that the adults in his life would be there to catch him if he fell. James's phone buzzed with a text message. Patricia Hawkins, letting him know that Emily had made the final restitution payment. The money would go into a college fund for Liam. Something good growing from the wreckage of betrayal. "Daddy," Liam called out, pedaling confidently now, his face glowing with pride and joy. "Look how fast I can go." "I see you, son," James called back, and realized that those 4 words, "I see you," contained everything that mattered. He saw his boy. He was here to witness his childhood, to celebrate his victories and comfort his defeats. He was home. As Liam pedaled around the yard in circles, his laughter echoing through the neighborhood, James thought about the photo he'd carried through 2 years of war, the image of a perfect family that had never really existed. That photo was gone now, lost somewhere in the chaos of legal battles and custody hearings. But it didn't matter. The real thing was so much better than any photograph could capture. His son was home. They were both home. And finally, for the first time in years, the future looked exactly like it was supposed to. "Daddy, will you teach me to ride with no hands?" Liam asked, skidding to a stop in front of the porch. James grinned, remembering his own father teaching him the same skill in this very driveway 30 years ago. Some things, the important things, came full circle if you fought hard enough for them. "Absolutely, buddy," he said, walking down to join his son. "But first, let's make sure you've mastered riding with hands. Then we'll work on the fancy stuff." Liam nodded seriously, understanding that some lessons couldn't be rushed, that building trust and confidence took time. It was a lesson they'd both learned the hard way, but it was one that would serve them well in all the adventures yet to come. As father and son worked together in the afternoon sun, their laughter mixing with the sound of bicycle wheels on pavement, the house on Maple Street finally felt like what it had always been meant to be, home. If you made it to the end, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. It truly means the world to us. See you in the next one.